Good evening. The news le fáilte ribh or Museum na Héireann inniu. You're incredibly welcome to the museum this evening for the media launch of Studio and State, our new exhibition, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all this evening and our speakers. We're delighted to have both the Lord Mayor and Tánaiste here this evening to review the exhibition and share their thoughts. I'm going to just open up to the Lord Mayor to say a few words. Mayor, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Tánaiste, Lynn, Barbara. It's my great privilege to be here this evening. Studio and State marks the first major collaboration between Dublin City Council's Hugh Lane Gallery and the National Museum of Ireland. And it's really inspiring to see the collections of the two institutions being brought together to explore the 1921 treaty between Great Britain and Ireland, a really pivotal moment in our nation's history. As we know, Sir John Lavery was born in Belfast, and while he spent most of his life in Scotland and England, he never forgot his Irish roots. He was encouraged to paint subjects by Hazel, Lady Lavery, his wife, and indeed he gave many of his Irish pictures to the Hugh Lane Gallery in 1935 in memory of her. This memorial bequest of 34 works included the group of portraits of the 9 treaty signatories we see here in this exhibition. Lavery was accorded the rare honour of both the freedom of Belfast and the freedom of Dublin City, and he received the freedom of his native city following a gift of 34 paintings to the Belfast Museum and Art Gallery, now the Ulster Museum, in 1929. His in appreciation of his similar generous gift to Dublin, my predecessor, Alderman Alfie Byrne, presented Lavery with the freedom of the city of Dublin in September 1935. And speaking at a reception for that freedom in City Hall, he paid great credit to Hazel for encouraging him to do something for Ireland. And interestingly, he said, "I found it very difficult because I was a portrait painter and patriotism and paint are very different to amalgamate." And I think if you actually see his paintings, you go, no way, they're absolutely stunning. He indicated that he was very anxious to be considered an Irishman, particularly in London, where he frequently had to tell them he was an Irishman, and where they often replied, "Oh yes, from Glasgow." At that same Freedom of the City event, W.T. Cosgrave thanked Lavery, saying, "He has given the city portraits of men who made recent Irish history, men who were privileged to play their parts at a fateful moment at national crisis and to achieve for the first time a victory for the Gael." Despite his reticence, Lavery did successfully meld patriotism and paint in recording those who participated in that fateful moment of the Anglo-Irish Treaty. And thanks to his generosity, we are able to reflect on Lavery's treaty portraits at this time of commemoration. They're being shown here in Collins Barracks for the first time, alongside historical objects and documents from the National Museum, really enabling a richer understanding of the events 100 years ago. So as Lord Mayor of Dublin, it brings me great pride to be here to launch this exhibition alongside Tánaiste Varadkar. And it gives us another great addition to the various commemorations that form the decade of centenaries. By telling the unique history of the treaty negotiations through innovative and unique exhibitions such as these, we can continue to reflect on the complexity of our history and promote collaboration and cooperation for generations to come. I want to congratulate both the National Museum of Ireland and the Hugh Lane Gallery for such a positive and successful collaboration. Thank you all.
Gurmagad, Lord Mayor, and I'm going to welcome our chair, Catherine Heaney, now to say a few words.
Or Vera, Tánaiste agus a Gaoine Úsal. Is on our dum fáte curriv goléir dun crinu jaspiog anocht. As I sat down earlier to just consider what I might say this evening, I sort of felt a sense of an ending. And while recent months and the months to come probably represent some of the most difficult parts of the centenaries, we're also approaching the moment of truth. And by next year, this time next year, in fact, we'll be closing out on a decade of remembering, reflecting, and learning. And we've learned lots. From the lockout, I suppose, at the start of the decade of centenaries, right up to the signing of the treaty, there's been an opportunity really to revisit the events that have contributed to where we've journeyed to where we are today. And during that 10-year journey, I think much has changed also. When I was appointed as chair of the National Museum of Ireland in 2016, I saw a cultural sector that was still suffering from the impacts of recession-related defunding. There are still gaps, but state investment and ambition has been greatly improved. And what has changed too is the leadership. Women now occupy the majority of senior leadership roles in cultural institutions, I think, which is incredible and demonstrated, I think, by tonight. Not quite what the portraits on the wall say, but nonetheless. And as a result of that, I think, and partially due to the journey we've travelled, there's enormous energy and positivity in the cultural sector right now. And if it weren't for COVID imposing upon us, I think this energy will be untamable. So back in 2016, when Minister Heather Humphreys at the time appointed me, she regularly called us, the leaders, the chairs of the various cultural institutions, around a table. And she would ask us again and again to collaborate, to share collections and become more accessible to communities. This exhibition, in my view, is a manifestation of the positive energy and the vision that was planted some years ago. I'm afraid, I suppose, the pearls of being a politician, Alison, and you may have great dreams in the development plan that you've so effectively chaired for Dublin City, but sometimes you're not always in a position to see the results of your hard work. So I think that's worth noting tonight, just to consider that legacy. This collaborative exhibition has many mothers, and indeed it has a father in Logan, so it's not completely, I suppose, female-driven, but nonetheless, I'd like to thank the team here at the National Museum, led so ably as usual by Dr. Audrey Whitty and the wider team. And I'd also like to thank my former board member, my former board colleague. Unfortunately, I don't see her here right now, but Dr. Mary O'Dowd, who was so important in advising us as a board and indeed the executive just about sort of that, I suppose, important remembering of people that sometimes were excluded from the commemorations. So I'd just like to note that. I'd also like to pay tribute most especially to Dublin City Council and the Hugh Lane, and I think Barbara will attest to the energy and the great positivity that this collaboration has brought to both the museum and the Hugh Lane. And of course, just to thank the National Museums of Northern Ireland, the National Gallery and the Military Archives, from which some of this exhibit was drawn. The support is really, really valued. So just looking beyond the decade of centenaries, I think there's a really exciting opportunity. It's a time to take from the learnings and relationships we've now earned and reflect a bit more on the inclusive and dynamic culture sector that we can now build. And I know I see the Chief Executive of Dublin City Council and Richard here as well, Richard Shakespeare, and I know that they're very much aware of the role of culture in, I suppose, helping to reopen Dublin and just create a new kind of offering. And it's just kind of interesting listening to everybody tonight just talking about the huge surge in domestic audiences coming to cultural institutions. So this is a really great opportunity for us and, you know, one I hope we don't lose. But of course, political engagement, continued political engagement beyond the decade of centenaries is really important, as is leadership. And investment, of course, is never too far away. And that's not just in the bricks and mortar, but also in the digital infrastructure to create a more inclusive, cultural, vibrant sector. I think we're in a good place, so glacú leis agus gurb maith agaibh.
Thank you, Chair. And just in terms of putting something like this together, there's always two or one or many people, but in this case, both Edith and Logan, I think, who are the lead curators on this project, are going to come forward and just share with us a little bit about the journey. Thank you, Edith and Logan.
So, Lord Mayor, Tánaiste, good evening, everyone. My name is Edith Andres, as Lynn has pointed out, and I had the pleasure of co-curating together with Logan Sisley Studio and State, and also with a wonderful team here at the museum, and also a wonderful team at the Hugh Lane Gallery, and also with our external advisors and contractors as well. There was, and there still is, a great synergy and exchange in this collaboration, which we hope echoes in the exhibition. Sorry, enough mask. So, as human beings, we do not exist in a vacuum or in isolation, and this goes for the objects that we have put on display as well. Paintings and historical documents, of course, existed alongside each other. So we are all involved in history making through our actions, the stories we tell and the objects we keep and pass on as well. And exhibitions such as Studio and State can also remind us that we have choices, and that our actions and decisions now influence, to a smaller or to a larger extent, what will happen in a few years or decades. And the signatories of the treaty 100 years ago were acutely aware of this, of course, as were Hazel and John Lavery as well. The home of the Laverys was not only a place of art production, but also one of conversation, entertainment, and mediation. And in this spirit, we hope that the exhibition, the catalogue, and also the public programme will ignite many thought-provoking conversations and offer opportunities for reflection and exchange as well. And with this, I hand over to Logan Sisley, who is the Head of Collections at Hugh Lane Gallery. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. Good evening, Tánaiste, Lord Mayor. And I wish to echo the gratitude Edith has expressed to all of our colleagues, because this wasn't just two people, this was a huge team effort across many departments in both institutions. I also wish to thank the writers to our catalogue, which further extend the scope and kind of engagement of the themes outlined in the exhibition. The artworks and objects in Studio and State tell the story of a unique intersection between politics and painting, documenting a pivotal moment in Irish and British history. The exhibition is possible thanks to the richness of the collections in our two institutions, and also to the generosity of John Lavery in gifting his works to the Hugh Lane Gallery. And while Studio and State is a collaboration between two institutions, I also wish to echo the acknowledgement of the loans from the military archives, from the National Gallery of Ireland, and particularly I think it's fitting we have a work from the Ulster Museum on display from Lavery's home city. And in standing before his paintings, we stand where the artist stood as he painted the portraits of the treaty signatories. We see the brushstrokes applied in sittings that took place in precious moments between meetings. And a similar physical link to those delegates is present in the collections of the National Museum objects, such as the pen once held by Michael Collins. The paintings and the objects in this exhibition create a unique and visceral experience and connection to historical events. And I'm thrilled after all the months of work that we are able to now share this exhibition with the public. Thank you.
See the catalogue, just to show everybody. This is the beautiful catalogue, which I'm sure will be on sale in our Lord Mayor, Tánaiste, ladies and gentlemen, there have been lots of speeches this evening, so I will be blessedly brief. But these speeches do reflect the level and depth of collaboration between our two institutions on this fascinating and really quite brilliant exhibition. And walking through earlier, I think we were talking about this, so we put it in. I was struck by actually how deeply connected we are to the past as we stand and look at a portrait or indeed reflect upon an artefact. And as well as, you know, it really brings you back to another time, and so powerful and visceral, as Logan said. And in the exhibition, you see, as well as painting portraits, the Laverys and their studio played a central role in the treaty negotiations. As Oliver St. John Gogarty commented, at 5 Cromwell Place, men could meet as humans beyond the scent of herded wolves. The Laverys did more to bring about a settlement than all of the weary official and overworked weeks at Hans Place. Studio on Stage provides us with a contemporary lens through which to reflect on these personalities, their courage, their wiliness, ambition, determination, and also their humanity, and as well as the momentous events that occurred and which shaped the birth of modern Ireland. And it provides us with the incentive, the desire for new thinking, scholarship, and understanding of this, our shared history. And it also struck me, looking at this exhibition, how it underpins the importance of our public collections and confirms why we keep collecting both historical and contemporary art. Our collections enrich and extend our understanding of our culture, our people, and indeed our history in all of its complexities. And just as current events fade into the past, so too will our contemporary art. And like these artefacts and portraits, eventually take their place in a future history for the next generations to study, appreciate, and indeed untangle. We were delighted to work with the National Museum and Studio on State, and thank you to Lynn and to all of her team for such a positive and enriching relationship. Special congratulations to the two curators, Edith and Logan, my colleague Logan. It'll be nice to see you back in the gallery, Logan. We were worried you'd gone to the other side, so to speak. But their approach and focus to Studio on State, as you know, an exhibition is not just banging nails on the wall and hanging up paintings or taking things out of an archive and just putting them on shelves. It is the thought and the focus and the approach that has made this a splendid exhibition, thought-provoking and stimulating as the events it represents. And now I believe it's my pleasure to invite the Tánaiste to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you, Barbara, for the very kind introduction. It's said that great art illuminates our lives. It helps us to make sense of who we are and the world that we live in. This exhibition shows how great art also helps to illuminate the past, throwing light on areas that were hidden and making sense of the groundbreaking events that occurred 100 years ago. So thank you so much for inviting me to officially open this joint exhibition, an exhibition by the National Museum of Ireland and the Hugh Lane Gallery. And congratulations to everyone who's worked together to put this exhibition together, particularly to Edith and to Logan for the imagination and the creativity that you've brought to this project as co-curators, work that has taken, I believe, almost 2 years. John Lavery was a remarkable artist. Orphaned as a young boy, he rose from poverty to become one of the most celebrated artists of the day in Ireland and in Britain. As we know, during the treaty negotiations, he and his wife Hazel opened their home in South Kensington to politicians and diplomats on both sides. It became a sort of informal safe space where different viewpoints could be exchanged, opposing positions better understood, and a new path forward discovered. But along with these meetings, great art was also created. Lavery had an insight into the private individuals behind the public faces, and he approached his work with empathy, understanding, and intimacy that would have been impossible for anyone else to have achieved. Art became politics by other means, a way of exploring the public positions that were sometimes obstinate and inflexible, and finding new ways of compromising and moving things forward. Growing up as a young boy, moving from home to home, Lavery spent 3 years apprenticed as a photographer, and I think that must have had huge influence on how he approached his art. He was able to frame his paintings in such a way that captured the light and darkness, the mood and feelings of his subjects. As you see from the portraits, Michael Collins always liked to sit facing the door, always on alert. Throughout all his sittings, never took his coat off, never handed it over, because he always had a gun in his pocket. It was that same understanding that Lavery brought to his remarkable painting of the trial of Sir Roger Casement in 1916. In this exhibition, we also see the artefacts of this pivotal time in Irish history. The pens that signed for peace, the paper that gave Ireland the promise of independence and a better future. The treaty was a stepping stone to freedom, and the artworks and artefacts in this exhibition show us how that stepping stone was put in place. So congratulations to you all on what is a world-class exhibition. I hope visitors get to experience this, public health advice permitting, because it gives us a new and further insight into the people behind the treaty negotiations, an agreement negotiated in good faith, which changed forever the relationship between our two islands and became a template for other people seeking freedom around the world to follow. We see the people behind the difficult decisions. We get an insight into the stresses and tensions and fears they must have felt. And most of all, we get confirmation about the spirit of hope and optimism that drove them forward, a spirit that 100 years later continues to inspire us today. Thank you very much.
Tánaiste, and that concludes our speeches. But I think just to say, I think particularly after the Tánaiste's remarks there about our cultural spaces as being spaces that allow us to understand both sides of a story. And I think there's remarks made this evening about the drawing out the human nature of these particular political figures. And I think that echoes very much what I think we're about, which is that humanising element as opposed to the polarising element of different opinions. And as cultural spaces, I think we're perfectly placed to do that using our collections that are within the National Museum and on this occasion within Hugh Lane. So I do hope you enjoy the exhibition. We're looking forward to welcoming visitors to it, and thank you so much everybody for attending this evening.